When his runaway sheep escapes once again, the angry farmer sets off in search of it. But when he sees what's hiding in its wool, he turns pale and gasps in shock. Dawn broke over the rolling hills of the Scottish Highlands as Angus MacGregor stood at the threshold of his farmhouse, his face a storm of emotions as he contemplated the latest disappearance of his prized Cheviot ram, Hamish. This recurring problem had finally pushed Angus to his limit. His patience had worn thinner than the soles of his well-worn boots, and he knew it was time to take decisive action. "Blasted sheep," he growled, his thick Scottish brogue cutting through the crisp morning air. "I swear by all that's holy, Hamish, this is the last time you'll make a fool of me." The seasoned shepherd set out with his weathered crook to search for his wayward sheep. His determined stride carried him through wet fields, undeterred by discomfort. Despite his advancing years, Angus's steel-blue eyes remained sharp as he scanned the horizon, focused on locating his missing flock. As he trudged along, Angus's mind wandered to the strange occurrences of the past few days. Hamish, usually as predictable as the Highland rains, had been acting oddly. The ram had been restless, bleating at odd hours and shying away from Angus's touch. At first, Angus had dismissed it as stubbornness, but with Hamish on the loose again, a gnawing worry took root in his gut. What's gotten into that daft animal? Angus muttered to himself. The question hung in the air unanswered, save for the lonely cry of a distant crow. As the farmer crested a small hill, his eyes caught a flash of movement near the old standing stones, a place steeped in local legend and superstition. There, amidst the ancient monoliths, stood Hamish. The ram's wool gleamed in the early morning light, but something about its posture set Angus's teeth on edge. Hamish stood unnaturally still, his head cocked at an angle, as if listening to some unheard voice. A chill ran down Angus's spine, unrelated to the cool Highland air. Hamish's usually gentle eyes now blazed with an unnatural light, darting wildly as if tracking invisible specters. The ram's powerful legs, once steady and sure, trembled and pawed at the ground with frenzied urgency. Each movement seemed driven by an unseen force, like a puppeteer pulling at Hamish's very essence. "Easy there, lad," Angus murmured, his voice low and soothing despite the unease churning in his gut. He inched closer, scanning Hamish for signs of injury or illness. That's when he noticed something that defied explanation. Hamish's thick wool seemed to be hiding something. "What in the name of all that's holy?" Angus gasped, staring at his prized sheep. Pushing aside his growing dread, he steeled himself, got closer, and plunged his hands into the thick fleece. His fingers probed over the eerie substance, and he knew instantly that it had no place in a sheep's wool. With growing anxiety, Angus carefully extracted the foreign object. As it came into view, the color drained from his face, leaving him as pale as the morning mist. In his trembling hand lay a small figurine, no longer than his thumb. Its appearance made his blood run cold. The figurine was carved from what appeared to be ancient bone and depicted a twisted inhuman form, a grotesque amalgamation of limbs and appendages that defied natural law. Most disturbing of all were the faces etched into its surface. "Mother of God," Angus whispered, his voice hoarse with shock. But this was only the beginning. With growing horror, Angus realized the abomination was not alone. His questing fingers found more hidden within Hamish's wool. 2 more of these nightmarish sculptures, nestled against the ram's skin. Each one he pulled free was more disturbing than the last. As he rid Hamish of the figurines, Angus felt the world tilt around him. His mind reeled, unable to comprehend the implications of what he had discovered. How had these things come to be hidden in Hamish's wool? What dark purpose did they serve? And most chillingly of all, who, or what, had put them there? As Angus stood amidst the ancient standing stones, his mind reeling from the grotesque figurines scattered at his feet, a voice cut through his daze like a knife through butter. "I see you found them too." The farmer whirled around, his heart leaping into his throat. Approaching from behind was Morag Mackenzie, the shepherd from the neighboring valley. She was a familiar sight, but her usual cheerful demeanor was nowhere to be seen. Instead, her weathered face was etched with grim recognition, her eyes fixed on the bone carvings with a mixture of disgust and resignation. "Morag," Angus managed, his voice hoarse. "What in God's name is going on here?" The woman approached, her steps heavy with the weight of unwelcome knowledge. She stood beside Angus, picking up one of the figurines with a gloved hand. "It's worse than we thought," she said, her voice low and urgent. "These abominations are just the tip of the iceberg." Over the next few minutes, Morag unraveled a tale that seemed too outlandish to be true. Yet it explained the inexplicable events plaguing the Highland farms. A group of rustlers, more cunning and cruel than any before, had devised an elaborate scheme that preyed not just on the farmers' livestock, but on their very fears and superstitions. "They call themselves the shepherds of the old ways," Morag explained, her lip curling in disgust. "But they're nothing more than wolves in sheep's clothing." The rustlers would secretly plant these disturbing artifacts in the sheep's wool, using methods that left no trace of human interference. Then, posing as spiritualists or mystics, they would approach the farms, claiming to sense a dark presence among the flocks. They offered to cleanse the sheep and the land, but their services came at a steep price. "Those who can pay find their troubles mysteriously solved," Morag continued. "But those who refuse or can't afford their protection." She trailed off, her eyes darkening. "Well, that's when the real trouble begins." Angus listened in growing horror as Morag described how farms that turned away the shepherds soon found their flocks dwindling. Sheep would vanish in the night, leaving no trace, save for the occasional grotesque figurine left as a calling card. Some farmers reported hearing unearthly noises in the dark, while others spoke of shadowy figures that vanished when approached. "It's all smoke and mirrors," Morag said firmly. "But it's effective. They're playing on old fears, Angus. Stories of the Fae and darker things our grandparents whispered about, and people are falling for it." As the full scope of the scheme became clear, Angus felt a whirlwind of emotions churning within him. He was shocked by the audacity of the plot, and his anger flared at the exploitation of his fellow farmers. Beneath these initial reactions, a growing sense of determination took hold. This was no longer just about stolen sheep. It had become an assault on their way of life and the very foundation of their community. "Aye, and it's high time we put a stop to it." As the two farmers stood there, surrounded by the ancient standing stones and the eerie bone figurines, a silent understanding passed between them. This was bigger than their individual farms, bigger than their long-standing rivalry over grazing rights and water access. This was about protecting their homes, their livelihoods, and the very soul of the Highlands they both loved. "We'll need to be clever," Angus mused, his mind already racing with possibilities. "These shepherds have been playing us like fiddles. It's time we turn the tables on them." Morag's lips curved into a wry smile. "I never thought I'd see the day when I'd be plotting with Angus McGregor," she said. "But desperate times call for desperate measures. What did you have in mind?" Over the next hour, as the morning mist began to lift from the hills, Angus and Morag hatched the beginnings of a plan. They would need to gather evidence, rally the other farmers, and set a trap for the rustlers. It would be dangerous, and success was far from guaranteed, but neither of them was willing to stand idly by while their community was terrorized. "We'll need eyes and ears everywhere," Angus said. "Your nephew, the one who's always tinkering with gadgets, think he could rig up some of those trail cameras around the pastures?" Morag nodded enthusiastically. "Aye, and my cousin works for the local paper. We can get the word out, but quietly. Don't want to tip our hand too soon." As they talked, the alliance between them grew stronger. Old grievances were set aside, replaced by a shared purpose that burned bright and fierce. "We'll need a name," Morag said suddenly, a glint of humor in her eyes despite the gravity of the situation. "Every good alliance needs a name." Angus chuckled, the sound rough but genuine. "How about the Real Shepherds of the Highlands? Seems fitting, doesn't it?" As they shook hands, sealing their pact, both Angus and Morag felt the shift in the air. The standing stone seemed to loom a little less ominously, and even Hamish the ram appeared to have shaken off some of his unnatural behavior. Over the next couple of weeks, Angus and Morag, alongside other members of the community, secretly concocted plans to bait the rustlers. Angus's farm was transformed into an elaborate trap, his flock carefully selected for their calm temperament, grazing peacefully in the moonlit field, unaware of their role as bait. Word had been strategically spread through the community about Angus's cursed flock. Morag's cousin at the local paper had run a seemingly innocuous story about strange occurrences at the McGregor farm, laden with just enough superstitious undertones to pique the interest of their targets. As the moon reached its peak, Angus and Morag took their positions. Angus crouched behind a low stone wall, gripping a sturdy walking stick, while Morag was hidden in the shadows of the barn, her trusted shepherd's crook at the ready. The wait was excruciating, every rustle of leaves and distant animal cry setting their nerves on edge. Then, just as Angus was beginning to wonder if their plan had failed, he saw them, shadowy figures moving with an unnatural stealth across his land. His heart began to race, a mixture of fear and anticipation coursing through his veins. He caught Morag's eye across the yard, giving a slight nod. This was it. The rustlers, 3 in total, approached the flock with practiced ease. Their dark clothing blended with the night, making them seem like living shadows. As they reached the sheep, one of them pulled out a small object, undoubtedly one of their grotesque figurines. Angus felt a surge of rage. This was the moment to act. With a roar that shattered the night's silence, he leaped from his hiding place. "Not my sheep, you idiots!" he bellowed, charging towards the startled rustlers. Chaos erupted in the moonlit field. The rustlers, realizing they had been caught in a trap, didn't go down without a fight. They scattered, using the confusion of the panicked sheep to their advantage. Angus found himself grappling with a burly man nearly twice his size, the rustler's fist connecting with his jaw in a blow that made him see stars. Across the field, Morag was holding her own. Her shepherd's crook whirled through the air with deadly accuracy, years of managing unruly rams evident in every movement. She caught one rustler in the midsection, doubling him over with a pained grunt. The fight was fierce and desperate. Angus could taste blood in his mouth as he struggled with his opponent, their bodies crashing to the ground in a tangle of limbs. Just when it seemed the tide might turn against them, the sound of police sirens cut through the night. Morag's cousin had come through, alerting the authorities at the prearranged time. The rustlers, hearing the approaching law enforcement, fought with renewed desperation, knowing their time was running out. As the police cars pulled up, their lights painting the scene in harsh blues and reds, Angus managed to pin his opponent to the ground. Panting heavily, he reached down to pull off the man's mask, determined to see the face of the one who had caused so much trouble. What he saw made his blood run cold. "Callum," Angus gasped, his voice barely above a whisper. The face staring back at him, twisted with rage and fear, was unmistakably that of his own cousin, Callum McGregor, who had left the family farm years ago, supposedly to seek his fortune in the city. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Angus felt as if the ground beneath him had suddenly given way, leaving him in a freefall of disbelief and betrayal. So this is how these criminals had been able to get their hands on his beloved ram. They had used a personal connection to lure the animal away at night and plant doubts in his head. His grip on Callum's shirt loosened, his mind reeling from the shock. "Why?" Angus finally managed, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Why would you do this to your own family? To your own town?" Callum's face, so familiar yet now so foreign, twisted with a bitterness that seemed to age him beyond his years. He spat out his response, each word dripping with long-held resentment. "You think I wanted to leave? The farm was dying, Angus. This was the only way to survive in these forsaken hills. We could have found another way," Angus protested, but Callum cut him off with a harsh laugh. "Another way? Like what?" "Watching our heritage wither away, piece by piece. You were always too stubborn to see it, Angus. The old ways are dead. This," he gestured around wildly, "this was adaptation. Survival." Angus shook his head, a deep sadness settling in his chest. "No, this was betrayal. Of your family, of your neighbors, of everything our ancestors built." As the police moved in to take Callum away, Angus stood on shaky legs. He watched as his cousin, the boy he had grown up with, shared dreams and secrets with, was led away in handcuffs. The revelation left a bitter taste in his mouth, worse than any blood from the fight. Morag appeared at his side, her own battle won. She placed a comforting hand on his shoulder, understanding without words the depth of his pain. The night settled back into an uneasy quiet. The immediate threat was over. But Angus knew that the real battle was just beginning. The wounds of betrayal would take far longer to heal than any physical injuries from the fight. As he looked out over his land, the sheep now settling back into their peaceful grazing, Angus felt the weight of his family's legacy more keenly than ever before. The Highlands had always been a harsh mistress, demanding grit and determination from those who called her home. But now, in the aftermath of his shocking revelation, Angus realized that the greatest challenges often came not from the land, but from the complex web of human relationships that tied them all together. What would you do if you found out that a close family member was threatening to destroy everything your ancestors worked hard for? Do you think Callum and the others could have found another way to save their farms? Tell us in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.